Chapter 471. The flame serpent scuttled over happily. Wilbur kicked it away in annoyance, coming up to Catalasia's corpse. The corpse was still in Catalasia's third form. Most of these forms would usually disappear after the person died, returning their corpse to their original form. However, it was clear that Catalasia was an exception. Wilbur had already used his iris veritas for the day and could not use it to inspect the state the corpse was currently in. Thus, Wilbur began to scope out the body using his own spiritual sense. Using spiritual sense was nowhere as good and precise as the iris veritas, but it was decent enough to give Wilbur a satisfying answer. After a thorough sweep, Wilbur let out a satisfying smile. Sure enough, Wilbur had guessed right. There was a blood embryo inside of Catalasia's body. That was how he had maintained his third form after death. There sure are a lot of these eggs around, huh? Wilbur wondered. If what Eileen and the rest said had been true, the blood embryo was considered a sacred item in the Church of Bloodism. How was it possible that some random member had one of them? Wilbur could not understand it and promptly gave up thinking about it. After all, it was definitely going to be a good contribution. It would be even better if he obtained a few more of them. He would not mind killing a few more of these guys to get them. He tossed Catalasia's corpse into the dragon's altar after that. A pale flame rose up as an ancient aura filled the air, and the corpse was turned into grace points at once. The golden hourglass lit up and showed 480 grace points. Wilbur was overjoyed. This blood embryo had gotten him even more grace points than the one from Sulin Onyx of the Skull Cult. Wilbur thought about it and realized that it could be due to Catalasia's identity. Catalasia was much more powerful than Sulin, so it was only fair that his blood embryo would yield more grace points. Would that mean that the corpse of a sanctuary-level cultivator could be exchanged for grace points as well? The thought was pushed away as quickly as it had entered Wilbur's head. That was far too ruthless, and Wilbur was not that kind of person. Just then, the screen appeared in front of him with various options for him to choose from. The Emperor's Whisper was there once again. It could be added to any weapon like a booster, strengthening it with elements of defense, penetration, and critical attacks. He gave it some thought. A booster like this would have saved him a lot of trouble in that battle against Catalasia just now. He would have broken through the demon's defenses with just a few slashes. After pondering for a long time, Wilbur was truly tempted. It was honestly a very tempting power to have. Having it would once again increase his battle prowess. However, he knew that was not what he needed. What he needed was a pill that would improve his overall physical strength. As he leveled up his dragon's chant, his powers and strength would increase. If his body did not adapt and improve, he would eventually explode from the immense power. Letting out a sigh, Wilbur scrolled downward. A while later, he found what he was looking for. Scorching Sun Pill. According to the description next to it, the Scorching Sun Pill was forged with the core of a flame beast, tens of thousands of years old, and imbibing it would greatly improve one's overall constitution. It was definitely much more powerful than the Builder Pill. However, the cost for it was 470 grace points. Are you fucking kidding me? I just got 480. Yet this one pill alone costs 470. I swear to God. Are you doing this on purpose? Wilbur could not help but curse. Just then, an ancient aura rose above the altar that radiated a terrifying pressure. Wilbur was stunned. Was the old dragon getting back at him for yelling at it? Wilbur panicked a little. The dragon was powerful, and the dragon's altar it had created was an otherworldly treasure. Wilbur honestly did not dare to challenge its authority, no matter how powerful he became. Chapter 472. Wilbur hurried to say, "My man, I was joking. This is a great power, so of course it's worth this much." Just then, a voice sounded from within Wilbur's spirit. "Dear Offerer, you have been performing well as of late. I hereby grant you the title of Divine Dependent. Work hard, and you shall become an extraordinary being." At the same time, the words Divine Dependent appeared in Wilbur's consciousness. All the aura in the air disappeared right after, and the demiplane resumed its silence. Wilbur stood there for a long time. What the hell was Divine Dependent? It did not seem to give him any special powers at all. Was it really just a simple title? The thought of it made Wilbur curse out loud. For a god of gods, This dragon really liked to take the piss at him, didn't it? Giving Wilbur some dumb title and expecting him to work hard just because of that and keep coming to it with more offerings. A moment later, Wilbur could not help but sigh. It was not like there was anything he could do about it. The dragon's altar was practically chock full of goodies, and he would run to it the second he had an offering, with or without the stupid title. He silently tapped on the scorching sun pill selection. The pill emerged from the screen, hovering in front of Wilbur. The golden hourglass overturned, with only 10 grace points remaining now. Wilbur took the pill, shaking his head. He turned around and saw the flame serpent curled up in a corner, trembling with fear. Wilbur shouted, "Sheesh, you loser. Is it really that terrifying?" He seemed to have forgotten how nervous he had been just minutes ago. Glaring at the flame serpent, Wilbur exited his demiplane and returned to his room. He took the scorching sun pill and began to meditate as he channeled the pill's power. 3 days later, Wilbur emerged from his room in high spirits, coming to the garden in the square to look at the spiritual plants. They seemed to be growing well, radiating spiritual air that spread around the island. Wilbur nodded joyfully. Just then, Eileen walked over and looked at Wilbur. "You sure healed up fast. I could say the same about you. You don't look like you just went through a big battle," said Wilbur. Eileen nodded. "That's all thanks to this garden right here. Breathing in the spiritual air every day definitely helped me recover a lot faster." Well, shouldn't you get going now that Catalasia's dead?" Wilbur asked. Eileen smiled. "Trust me, the real trouble's yet to come, and there's no way you're going to be able to run from it. The Church of Bloodism isn't going to let you go so easily." Wilbur's expression darkened, and he turned to leave. Eileen chuckled, mumbling to herself, "That's what your duty always was. You'd never be able to avoid it." Wilbur walked around the island once, locating the room Gertrude was resting in, and barged right through the door. Gertrude was currently wearing a skimpy nightgown, lying on the couch fast asleep. Wilbur frowned. "Are you better yet?" Gertrude startled awake. She saw that it was Wilbur, and smiled as she lifted the hem of her nightgown. "Look, I'm still all hurt." "Stop that. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Gertrude was wearing nothing underneath, and the gesture practically revealed everything to Wilbur as he fled from the room. Gertrude chuckled to herself, promptly falling back asleep. Just as Wilbur was about to go back to his room, his phone rang. He picked up the phone, and an anxious voice came through. "Help me, sir." Chapter 473. Sammy Shandon? Wilbur was surprised. "What's up?" Sammy sounded beside herself with panic as she said, "Sir, my brother insisted on getting back at Rhea after we returned to Zealand, but Rhea ended up getting him arrested not long after, saying we were falsely accusing her. Now she's demanding a public apology and compensation, or I'm never going to see my brother again." Wilbur fell silent after listening to Sammy. Sammy had found Wilbur after being cursed by Rhea, and Wilbur had broken that very curse. There was nothing either of them owed to each other anymore. Now she was begging him for help again, and Wilbur did not really want to help if he was being honest. There was already too much happening in the world, and Wilbur could hardly afford to tend to every single thing. Yet the Shandons had gifted him with their family treasure, and he could not find it in him to turn down helping them. Sammy began to panic at Wilbur's silence. "Sir, Rhea's really too much. My brother's been beaten black and blue. You have to save him." "Well, can't you just apologize and compensate Rhea as she demanded?" Wilbur asked. Sammy said, "I'm more than willing to apologize, but Rhea's insisting I do it on national media for 15 days in a row. I can still grin and bear through that. I'll just quit performing altogether. However, she wants $1 billion in compensation, and we really don't have that much money." $1 billion? Is that woman out of her mind?" Wilbur frowned. Sammy was beginning to tear up. "She said I had damaged her acting career terribly, and $1 billion is the minimum she's asking for." Wilbur's frown deepened. Rhea was really crossing the line. It was bad enough that she had cursed Sammy before, and now she was trying to squeeze more out of Sammy after that was settled. How utterly despicable. Sammy sobbed. "Sir, I know you're the only one who can save my brother now. Please help me. I'll promise half of the Shandon's shares to you as long as you get him out." Wilbur said, "No, this isn't a matter of money. I'm doing it only because it's unfair to you. I'll be there by tomorrow. Send me the address and tell me the details once I get there. Yes, of course. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Wilbur hung up the phone and shook his head. He pulled up an airline website and saw that the earliest flight was at 8 o'clock at night. It would be past midnight by the time he got there. He gave it some thought and bought the tickets before returning to his room to continue meditating. At around 7 in the evening, Wilbur opened his eyes. He walked out of the room and ran into Faye. Hi! Wilbur greeted her with a smile. Faye glared at him. It's been days since I last saw you. Where are you going this time? Taking a short trip up to Zealand to settle something, Wilbur said awkwardly. Faye sighed. You're never around. It's practically impossible to even talk to you these days. I wouldn't have moved here if I knew this was going to be the case. Well, I've been a little busy lately, I swear. I promise I'll take you out to dinner when I'm back. Just the two of us. Wilbur said sheepishly. Faye huffed. Yeah. Go do whatever it is you need to then. Wilbur smiled awkwardly and got into his car to drive to the airport. Faye sighed, returning to her room dejectedly. Meanwhile, over in a top-secret room in Seachertown, Albert sat across from two elders at an antique table. The skinnier of the elders said, Wilbur Penn is a dangerous existence. He has mastered higher-order spells. He's definitely dangerous. The other elder, a bearded man, said. Albert chuckled. Shouldn't that be a good thing? We've got another expert in our department now. Can you vouch for his loyalty? It seems like no one can. That's right. The department prioritizes loyalty above all else. Skills are secondary. Albert shook his head. You're on the security committee. Of course you'd prioritize what keeps everyone safe, and that's understandable. However, Wilbur is so powerful that he has endless potential. That is what we need. You know we're strapped for manpower as it is. Have him come to North Seacher and swear his loyalty to the department with an agreement. Chapter 474. Albert frowned. I don't think that's a good idea. Let's take things slow and wait till he feels a sense of belonging in the department. So, you're saying you can't vouch for him either? Said the bearded elder. Albert sighed. I'm not denying that, but people like him are hard to come by. It's best if we don't trigger him, or we'll be suffering a loss over nothing. The two elders exchanged glances. We respect your opinion, but you're responsible for whatever comes out of this. Don't worry. I'll take full responsibility and leave you two out of it. Albert smiled. The elders got up to leave, bowing to Albert. Albert chuckled, muttering to himself, I'm already 1 foot in the grave. It hardly matters what I take responsibility for. What a useless threat to hold against me. Later that night, a plane landed in Zealand Airport. Wilbur emerged from the arrival gates, taking in the sight before him. Seachertown was a first-tier city, with a long and rich history of success and revolution. But Zealand was a super first-tier city. It might not have been around as long as Seachertown had, but was definitely far more advanced and developed in comparison. Tall buildings lined every road, with more neon lights than stars coming into sight when one looked up. Wow! Wilbur marveled to himself. He was about to find the nearest hotel he could stay in, thinking of reaching out to Sammy the next day. Yet just then, a colorful light rose from the mountains in the distance before fading the next second. Wilbur stopped short. What the hell is that? He gave it some thought and leaped onto the top of the nearest building. He jumped from roof to roof, and it did not take long before he arrived at the foot of the mountain the light had came out of. After an hour of hiking later, Wilbur finally reached the mountain's peak. There was a natural deck stretching out of the peak, overlooking the view beneath. On the deck was a straw house. There was a white-haired elder standing on the deck, looking out into the Zealand night sky. Wilbur could not help but sigh. This was just some cultivator who had advanced to another level after meditating in solitude. Wilbur did not have the heart to interrupt, so he turned to leave. Just then, the elder spotted Wilbur and called out in a bright and deep voice, "Young man, why not join me since you came all this way?" Wilbur turned back, bowing to the elder. "I'm sorry, but I have something to tend to. I'll be on my way now." The elder frowned. "You were powerful enough to make it here, and you're in the presence of power as well. Wouldn't it be a shame if we didn't have a friendly spar? I'll have to pass. I wouldn't want to disrupt your peace. Friendly battles between cultivators were more than normal around here. But two strangers battling each other could turn ugly, and it could end in unwanted injuries or even death. Wilbur did not feel like partaking in that tonight. Nonetheless, the elder insisted, well, fight or lose. Take this. The elder held out a wrist, and an enormous wave of spiritual energy surged forth. Wilbur frowned, slapping the wave away, causing the spiritual energy to fade into the air. The elder lit up. Incredible. I just came out of solitude today, so I'm in a pretty good mood. How about I take you in as my pupil if you can endure 3 of my moves? Chapter 475. Wilbur chuckled at once. You really don't have to, senior. Young man, it's very disrespectful of you to behave this way in front of a sanctuary-level cultivator. The elder frowned. Wilbur sighed. I mean no disrespect. I just don't think it's very nice to battle a stranger. How dare you? You should be honored that I even offered to take you in as my pupil. Very well. I won't push it since you so rudely turned me down. But I'm going to teach you a little lesson for messing with a sanctuary-level cultivator. The elder waved a hand after speaking, and a wave of rampant spiritual energy surged out, bringing about a howling sound. Wilbur frowned. He drew a circle with one hand, and the elder's blow disappeared into nothing. Oh, it seems I've underestimated you. The elder was clearly surprised, even a little intrigued. He took a step forward, launching another attack at Wilbur. Wilbur sighed, retaliating with an attack of his own. Both spiritual attacks collided in the air, letting out a rumble that rang through the mountains. Not bad, young man. The elder barked out a gleeful laugh, darting up to Wilbur as he tapped Wilbur several times around his body with spiritual energy. The elder was powerful, and his palms seemed to move at high speed, making it hard to predict his next move. It was, however, nothing in comparison to Wilbur's combat skills. Wilbur merely moved a single hand, blocking and deflecting every one of the elder's attacks with ease. A few minutes later, the elder's expression slowly turned into one of shock. He launched a particularly powerful attack, using the force to take a step back as he looked straight at Wilbur. You're probably the strongest person I've ever come across. That was quite impressive. Thanks. I'll be on my way now if you don't mind. Wilbur bowed, turning to leave. A battle like this was pointless, and he honestly could not be bothered to engage with it. However, the elder was clearly rearing to go now. That was just a warm-up. You can't leave just like that. Show me what you've got. Let's have some fun here. As he spoke, spirit energy surged out of the elder as a spear around 3 meters long appeared in his grasp. He pointed it at Wilbur, enveloping him with powerful spiritual pressure. Wilbur sighed. It seemed like he was going to have to beat this guy. He raised his hands, beckoning at the elder. This clearly enraged the elder, and he took a step forward with the spear in hand and launched over 10 attacks toward Wilbur. Wilbur remained unarmed, but his fists lit up with spiritual flames that hurled fireballs toward the spear. Several collisions later, all of the elder's attacks were completely nullified by Wilbur. However, Wilbur did not stop there. He advanced further as he rained down a series of blows in a counterattack. The elder was furious. He jerked the spear, and it lit up with a spiritual flame as a battle broke out between him and Wilbur. The elder gripped his spear, seeming completely different as his attacks turned swift and precise. Each part of the elder's spear seemed to be a weapon, attacking different parts of Wilbur's body, including vital parts like his ribs, throat, and heart. Nonetheless, Wilbur did not seem to panic in the slightest, weaving through the air as all of the elder's attacks missed him as he continued to attack the elder's chest. All at once, the elder found himself backing up from Wilbur's attacks. The elder was shocked and clearly infuriated now. He let out a cry, and the spiritual flame on the tip of the spear burned brighter as an enormous spiritual pressure rippled outward. Phoenix triple nod, spear charge, ultimate rush. The elder roared the words loudly, launching 3 powerful strikes in a row. The spear shook with rampant spiritual energy, and 3 spear strikes shot out toward Wilbur. It was the Phoenix triple nod. Anyone struck by either of the spear strikes would be paralyzed for a second, which would be more than enough for an expert to kill the victim. With no other choice, Wilbur had to take out his thunder cleaver. He did not add any lightning energy to the cleaver, making it no more than a large cleaver. Wilbur slashed the cleaver through the air, bringing down all 3 spears with its blade. Following that, however, the elder's spear grew in size as it came barreling toward Wilbur's face. The two of them had been battling each other in close proximity, and the sudden expansion of the spear would usually be enough to pierce right through the opponent. Wilbur's cleaver acted like a shield, deflecting the elder's spear charge with the flick of his wrist. Wilbur realized right after that there was now a mark on his cleaver, infused with the elder's spiritual energy. The elder let out a roar, moving as fast as lightning in circles around Wilbur as he unleashed a torrent of attacks against Wilbur with the spear. The cleaver was hardly enough to deflect all of the attacks, so Wilbur called out as he waved the cleaver around him against the spear. Yet to his confusion, there was no collision between both their weapons. Wilbur's cleaver was impressive, but the elder's spear seemed to be able to avoid its attacks every single time and even throw in some attacks at Wilbur. Wilbur was a little surprised as he dodged from the attacks, but quickly understood what was going on. Not only was the elder's spear charge a powerful attack, but it could also leave behind a spirit imprint on the opponent's weapon. The elder would then be able to sense where the imprint was moving to, and be able to dodge the opponent's attacks while finding opportunities to attack using the ultimate rush. The ultimate rush was swift and powerful, making the spear move at the speed of light and leaving behind countless afterimages. To be honest, the elder's combat skills were also the strongest Wilbur had seen. It was just a shame that his opponent was Wilbur. Wilbur moved in ways that practically defied the laws of physics, making the elder's ultimate rush completely unable to hurt him at all. At the same time, Wilbur swung his cleaver toward the elder. Despite the fact that the elder was able to predict where the cleaver was moving to, Wilbur was moving it in a way that seemed almost impossible to track. Upon understanding the elder's strategy, Wilbur let out a cry as spiritual energy surged from his body. The imprint on the cleaver disintegrated at once, and Wilbur unleashed a series of attacks towards the elder. Under the relentless assault, the elder's ultimate rush seemed to pale in comparison. With no other choice, the elder let out a roar as both weapons clashed wildly, sending himself over 10 meters backward as he stared at Wilbur solemnly. Wilbur did not follow up with another attack. Instead, he merely smiled. "Shall we just call it a day then, senior? I have to say you're a better fighter than me." "I didn't expect that," said the elder. Wilbur smiled. "I just got lucky. I haven't met many people nearly as powerful as I am in all of Dasha, but it appears I've met my match today." "It's an honor," the elder said. Chapter 477. Wilbur chuckled. "You're a brilliant fighter yourself, senior. No need for the pleasantries. You may have beaten me in combat, but I'm going all out now. I'd be careful if I were you," said the elder. Wilbur frowned. "Surely that isn't necessary." "Why not? I'm faced with an expert. I'm definitely getting a good fight out of this. If you manage to hold up for 3 minutes within my spirit barrier, my promise from before still stands," the elder replied. Wilbur shook his head in exasperation. "Are you really that desperate for a pupil? Many people can only dream of being my pupil, young man. Let me show you what real power looks like." The elder retracted the spear and shouted, "Wrath of Spear!" All at once, spiritual energy exploded from the elder's body and lit ablaze into spiritual flames. At the same time, 100 spears appeared within a 20-meter radius around both cultivators. The spears were all different in shape and size, burning brightly with overwhelming spiritual pressure. All that spiritual energy condensed into one, rolling toward Wilbur with overwhelming pressure that trapped him in a sea of spears at once. The elder stroked his beard. "Have you heard of what a sanctuary-level cultivator can do? This is the power of one. I don't even have to do anything. You won't last 3 minutes. A sanctuary-level cultivator was already impossibly terrifying, and the channeling of a spirit barrier only made all the wrath of spear radiate with an even stronger spiritual pressure. That would usually take any cultivator below sanctuary level down before they could even fight back. However, Wilbur merely smiled in response to that. The blade of his cleaver lit up with spiritual flames and lightning sparks. It had transformed into the Thunder Cleaver. The spiritual pressure of the Wrath of Spear was no longer enough to hold Wilbur down. The elder's expression turned to one of shock at the sight of the spiritual flame on Wilbur's Thunder Cleaver, but he nodded with a smile. Yes, I'd say you're the strongest below sanctuary level. Thanks, Wilbur replied calmly. The elder chuckled. Like I said, I'll take you in as my pupil if you can last 3 minutes. You're overestimating yourself. Wilbur was getting annoyed now, and his words turned curt. The elder frowned. How dare you talk back? Take this. He waved a hand and a spear appeared in his grasp as he brought it down harshly against Wilbur. Wilbur let out a cry, waving the Thunder Cleaver and smashing the spear into pieces. The next second, a different spear appeared in the elder's grasp, and it was aimed at Wilbur's face. The Thunder Cleaver was raised high in the air, and the second spear was destroyed. This happened again, and Wilbur shattered the spear once more. The elder took one last step forward, and a smoking spear appeared. He brought it down on Wilbur in a thick fog. Wilbur spun the Thunder Cleaver around, and the smoking spear was smashed into pieces. The elder was completely in shock now but continued to cast another spear. This one was scarlet all over, covered in blood-red plum blossoms as he attacked Wilbur once more. Wilbur straightened his Thunder Cleaver. The bloody blossom spear cracked, drifting to the ground slowly in the form of blood-red petals. Good move. The elder seemed to be enjoying this, summoning a spear with a dragon's head on it this time. The spear was aimed at Wilbur's chest, with the dragon's mouth agape. Every attack from the spear seemed to serve a different purpose, laced with impossible energy that made the entire mountain shake. Any regular person would be scared out of their wits at the sight of it. Chapter 478. Wilbur furrowed his brows. The Thunder Cleaver swung out in a dangerous circle, and the dragon's head spear was reduced to dust. The elder took another step forward, now holding a spear with a tiger's head at the tip that let out a roar. Wilbur stood still with his cleaver by his side as spiritual energy flowed out. The tiger head spear was snapped clean in half, dissipating into the air in waves of rampant spiritual energy. Now take this one. The elder took his 8th step forward, and a spear with 5 chains dangling from it shot out toward Wilbur. Spikes grew from the chains as the spear flew, and the chains wrapped themselves around Wilbur. Wilbur let out a cry, spinning the Thunder Cleaver once and bringing it down. A burst of spiritual energy surged out, destroying the penta-chain spear. The elder was furious, taking his 9th step forward. A pale, wispy spear appeared in his grasp, almost like a shadow. Both men were less than 5 meters apart now, and the tip of the spear barely touched the center of Wilbur's brows. Wilbur frowned. This spear had spirit-usurping qualities too. He did not use the Thunder Cleaver this time, channeling his spirit energy instead to form a small silver shield to knock the shadow spear away. With a loud bang, both the shield and the shadow spear shattered, disappearing from sight. Amidst the elder's alarm, Wilbur let out a sneer. It's time for you to take an attack from me too. The Thunder Cleaver in his hands exploded with spiritual flames and lightning strikes as a terrifying spiritual pressure came forth. The elder widened his eyes in terror, rushing to back up as he grabbed the 2 nearest spears with scales on them and hurled them out. Wilbur waved the Thunder Cleaver, and both scaled spears collided with each other in a deafening noise as countless waves of spiritual energy shot into the sky. The elder was a little over 10 meters away from Wilbur now, looking at him solemnly. You have sanctuary-level powers. Why didn't you summon your spirit barrier? Because I didn't need to, said Wilbur calmly. The elder was furious. No one had even spoken to him like that. Don't get too cocky, young man. The elder let out a cry, and the spiritual flames around his body shot into the sky and lit up the entire mountain's peak. At the same time, 100 spears rose into the air, condensing above the elder to form a new spear. The spear was about 5 meters long, but it was covered with rolling symbols and glowing with spiritual flames. The elder gripped the spear, gaining bravado as he shouted, "Have a taste of this." The spear in his hands held all of the elder's spiritual energy, as well as the power of his spirit barrier. Even the elder's hands were trembling as he held the spear, as if he could hardly control the power of the spear himself. Just then, however, Wilbur put away his thunder cleaver to stare the elder down. The elder was livid at this. "How dare you mock me?" Just as his cry rang through the air, he threw the spear at Wilbur. The spear spun as it flew, hurtling toward Wilbur like a ballistic missile. It was an immensely powerful blow that could destroy a mountain. Chapter 479. However, while the elder's ultimate spear condensed, Wilbur had already muttered a few chants as spiritual energy surged from him in terrifying waves. He finished the spell, put his palms together, and shouted, "Boulder Dragon Bomb." As he cried out, a gigantic dragon's head rose up from the ground in front of Wilbur. The dragon opened its mouth, spitting out a giant boulder. Wilbur had used this move on one of Chen Steft's pupils, Zachary Yanez, before. The boulder was about half a meter wide, burning brightly with spiritual flames and covered in runes as it hurtled toward the ultimate spear. A deafening rumble shook the air around them, and the ultimate spear was shattered in an instant. However, the boulder dragon bomb did not seem to stop. It continued to spit out boulders at the elder. The elder's face paled, and he used up all the spiritual energy he had left to form a spiritual shield. With a loud rumble, the elder was able to deflect this incoming bullet. However, blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The boulder's attack was weaker this time compared to the previous collision with the ultimate spear. Otherwise, the elder would not have survived. Nonetheless, just as he had caught his breath, another boulder churtling toward him. The elder was drained of spiritual energy and could not fight back at all. Panic rose in the elder's chest, and he cracked out, "Forgive me, Senior. I surrender. Please forgive me." The boulder shot past him, missing the elder by a mere inch and hitting the peak of a mountain a few hundred meters away. The peak of the mountain was shaved off altogether, causing sand and dust to fly everywhere. The terrified elder finally realized that he was in the presence of someone whose power was so vast that it was beyond his comprehension, and he was no match for that person. The elder fell to his knees shakily, sobbing, "I apologize for my foolishness, Senior. Please, forgive me. You just entered sanctuary level. I don't know why you're this cocky. Cultivation is hard enough as it is. It's hardly worth getting yourself into trouble over a little argument," said Wilbur. The elder had completely surrendered then, bowing over and over again. "I'll remember this lesson well, Senior. I'll remember it for the rest of my life." "Let's hope you do then." Wilbur turned away, leaping off the mountain and disappearing into the night. The elder only got up much later, staring at the mess from the battle and the destroyed mountain peak. "It really is a new era now. I guess I've really gotten old." He smiled bitterly. "To think that I even thought of taking him in as a pupil. What a joke. I'm better off paying my kids a visit and going back to cultivating in solitude." The elder bowed in the direction Wilbur had left and thrice, then left the mountain as well. Wilbur found himself a hotel to stay in for the night back in Zealand City and could not help but chuckle at the thought of the elder. It was clear that he had just emerged from cultivation in solitude and was a new sanctuary-level cultivator. He would be powerful enough to take on most of the wandering world, honestly. It was just a shame that he happened to run into Wilbur, and even insisted on battling him. Wilbur could only hope that this battle did not traumatize the elder, or he was going to have trouble in his future cultivation. Shaking his head, Wilbur took a shower before lying in bed to meditate. The next morning, Wilbur woke up and had breakfast at the hotel before calling Sammy. Chapter 480. Sammy showed up soon and the two of them sat down in the living room. "You're finally here, sir," Sammy said, bursting into tears. Wilbur said, "Come on, don't cry. Tell me what happened." Wilbur honestly did not understand how someone as rich and famous as Sammy would be trampled on like this. Sammy eventually forced herself to calm down before saying, "Sir, my brother went to look for Rhea to lecture her ever since we returned to Zealand. Rhea's not admitting to anything and even said my brother was falsely accusing her." Wilbur did not know what to say. There was no actual proof, and there was not much that could be done if Ria insisted on denying it. My brother refused to let it go, and the two of them went into many arguments, only for Magnus to get my brother arrested in the end for slandering an artist signed to his company, demanding an apology and compensation, said Sammy. Wilbur frowned. Who's Magnus? Magnus Ray. He's the general manager of one of the biggest film companies in Zealand, Zealand Entertainment. The company's worth over $3 billion, Sammy explained. Wilbur said, even so, isn't doing so a bit too much? Sir, Zealand Entertainment actually belongs to Zealand Enterprise. Meanwhile, Zealand Enterprise is partially owned by the officials. That's how Magnus can do whatever he wants. Ria's one of the most famous celebrities in Zealand Entertainment right now, and Magnus would do anything to protect her. Wilbur nodded. I see. It's no wonder he had the nerve to do that. They had my brother arrested and told me to issue a public apology on all news platforms. They even demanded to have it broadcasted for 15 days straight to disperse the negative press, as well as $1 billion to compensate for damaging their reputation. I don't mind apologizing, but my entire family's assets are only worth a little over $1 billion. It's clear that Magnus is trying to use this to usurp our family fortune, and my father's been bedridden from anger since then. I don't know what else to do, Sammy explained, tearing up once more. Wilbur said, Ria and Magnus have indeed crossed the line. I know, sir, but I can't win against them. Please help me and save my brother. Wilbur fell silent before saying, how about you reach out to Magnus? Let's have a talk with him tomorrow. What if the talk ends badly? Sammy asked cautiously. Wilbur smiled. Let's be civil about this first. If they disrespect me to my face, I'll have a proper reason to get extreme too. Those words made Sammy let out a long sigh of relief. She knew just how powerful Wilbur was, and his words gave her hope that her brother would be saved. She took her phone out at once, dialing Magnus' number. The call ended, and Sammy said, Magnus said 1 o'clock tomorrow, at the Revolving Restaurant in Caesar Hotel. Sure, we'll be there, Wilbur agreed. Sammy nodded, her face flushing. Can I take a shower here? Huh? I haven't been able to eat or sleep for days now. I haven't had a shower in ages, said Sammy, lowering her head. Wilbur huffed. Sure. Sammy nodded, turned on the shower in the attached bathroom, and started washing herself. The glass of the bathroom was translucent. The room was actually designed for couples. Sammy's every move was exposed to Wilbur, and her slender figure was completely visible. Wilbur hurried to get to his feet, walking to the window to stare pointedly at the view outside. A short while later, Sammy emerged from the shower with a towel around her. Being a celebrity, Sammy was obviously blessed with good looks and a stunning figure. She looked breathtaking with nothing but a flimsy towel wrapped around her, leaving little to the imagination. Chapter 481. Sammy sat on the bedside looking like a helpless little girl. It made Wilbur feel at a loss. You won't think I'm being rude, right, sir? Asked Sammy shyly. Wilbur coughed and said, It's almost fall, so don't catch a cold. Sir, I know that I don't deserve you, but feel free to take me if you want. I won't harass you, and I'll be honored. Also, I'm still a virgin, said Sammy while biting her lip and fully blushing. Wilbur frowned and approached Sammy slowly. She shut her eyes and lay down slowly. Then, he grabbed the blanket and covered her. He said, Rest for a while if you're tired. We'll depart when the time arrives. She hurriedly covered her face with the blanket and said in the quietest voice, I got it, sir. He shook his head, sat on the bedside, and started to smoke. He could not bring himself to take advantage of her. Time gradually passed. She quietly snuck out of bed and got dressed. She stood behind him while blushing. He checked the time and said, Let's go. All right, sir. She nervously led the way. They exited the hotel, got into her car, and drove towards Caesar Hotel. They passed through traffic for a long while before they parked at the hotel. They went to the top floor through the elevator and arrived at the Revolving Restaurant. The Caesar Hotel was kind of famous in Zealand, especially for its revolving restaurant on the top floor that had a full view of Zealand. Therefore, reservations were required to dine there, or they would not have any available seats. They arrived at the 98th floor and exited the guest elevator. The door of the Revolving Restaurant was across from them. I'm sorry, but our restaurant had been reserved today. Please make reservations for another day to dine here, said a waiter politely. Sammy was surprised. She said, but we're here to meet someone. May I ask who you're looking for? I'm looking for Magnus Ray, she replied. The waiter replied, please wait a moment. Mr. Ray is the one who reserved the restaurant today. Allow me to head inside and ask. She nodded, and the waiter headed inside. Wilbur said softly, he knows you're arriving, but he didn't inform the waiter. This is clearly intended as an insult. She stayed quiet because she was well aware of that fact, but was powerless to do anything about it. Soon, the waiter came out and said, please, come in. They walked into the restaurant and saw 4 people in the best seat of the restaurant. 2 men and 2 women were at the window seat, and there was a bodyguard standing next to them. There was no one else in the restaurant apart from those 5 people. The 4 of them glanced at Sammy and Wilbur, but no one said anything. One of the women was looking at Sammy judgmentally, clearly despising her. Which one of them is Magnus Ray? Wilbur asked Sammy. Chapter 482. Sammy looked at a man in his 40s with a suit and a slick-back hairstyle. Wilbur nodded and went to the table. He said, Mr. Ray, I would like to talk to you about Dom Shandon. Magnus ate some sashimi and drank some wine before he looked at Wilbur calmly. He smiled and asked, who the fuck are you to talk to me like that? You're someone with status too. Don't you think it's rude to talk like that? Asked Wilbur. Magnus laughed and said, my politeness is for elites like us. Nobodies like you who came out of nowhere should feel honored that I'm even speaking to you. What a joke. They dare send a rondo to talk shop. I think you're crazy, mocked a glamorous woman next to Magnus. Sammy was infuriated right away, but she endured it. Wilbur looked toward the woman and asked slowly, you must be Rhea Quinn, right? Rhea mocked. What's the matter? Do you need an autograph? You need to wait in line. I don't have time right now. Her words made those 4 people laugh out loud and shake their heads. Sammy stepped forward and said, Mr. Ray, this is Mr. Wilbur Penn. I invited him to discuss my brother's release, so I hope you can be more respectful. Respectful? Who the hell is he to deserve our respect? Asked Rhea. Sammy was so angry that she was at a loss for words. Wilbur said slowly at that point, Rhea Quinn, you 2 used to be best friends, but you secretly placed a curse on her. Not only did you not feel any remorse after you've been exposed, but you even went ahead to mistreat Sammy. Don't you have a conscience? What did you say? Who the hell told you that I placed a curse on her? Rhea felt hurt, so she instantly lost her composure and screamed at him. Wilbur sneered and asked, what's this? Are you feeling indignant? Look at yourself. How long do you think your fame will last with a personality like that? Mr. Ray, this asshole is outrageous, said Rhea coquettishly. Magnus looked at Wilbur and said, you better watch it, or I'll break your legs if you dare to accuse Rhea again. You don't have what it takes to do that. You better release Dom, pay for compensation, then apologize, and we'll forget this whole thing even happened, said Wilbur nonchalantly. Magnus looked at Wilbur like he was looking at someone crazy. The man next to him burst into a fit of laughter. He said, Mr. Ray, I think you've been threatened, right? Magnus laughed. Then, he shook his head and said, there are all sorts of fucking people in this world. Get the fuck out right now. Do you hear me? The bodyguard in a suit stood in front of Wilbur when Magnus said that, staring at him coldly. Wilbur sized him up and chuckled. He said to Magnus, this is not the place for violence. You better not initiate an attack. It's best if we work this out peacefully. Work this out peacefully? Magnus sneered coldly and said, I stated my terms. Hold a press conference to apologize publicly and $1 billion as compensation. I'll release Dom Shandon after that and let this slide. Wilbur said in a low voice, the Shandon siblings only wanted justice. Why should they apologize? Also, why should they pay $1 billion as compensation? Because they accused the artist who works for me. You should know that Rhea is famous right now. The accusations against her caused an immeasurable loss for my firm. The $1 billion compensation is considered a merciful sum, said Magnus while stuffing his mouth with food. Rhea piped up arrogantly. Listen up. You must broadcast the apology press conference live nationwide. It will be trending in all mainstream media for 15 days. Not a day less, otherwise, You and your sibling can look forward to jail time. Wilbur chuckled and said, that's a nice plan. You can also get yourself trending to gain fame before eating the Shandons alive. That's killing two birds in one stone. Well played. Sammy was taken aback. She did not think of that. But she instantly realized after his reminder. She looked furious. Magnus looked at Wilbur and said slowly, you're quite smart. Even so. What can you do? The Shandons mean nothing in Zealand. You're an ignorant fool if you dare go against me. Chapter 483. Sammy angrily clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. She could not believe her ex-best friend treated her like that. She felt humiliated and wanted to slap Rhea. However, she knew she could not be reckless. Her brother was her hostage, so she could only endure. Wilbur said slowly at that moment, Rhea, you'll be punished for being so evil sooner or later. Magnus, you bullied people by abusing your power, so you won't have a good ending either. You better watch it. Yeah, right, Mr. Ray. It's outrageous for him to talk to us like that. Why don't you take care of him? Asked Rhea angrily. Magnus also looked displeased. He said coldly, Kid, do you really think Zealand is somewhere you can cause trouble in? Gary, break his legs and toss him in the river. The bodyguard, Gary, stepped toward Wilbur and reached out to grab him. Wilbur simply waved, and Gary backed away in surprise. He looked weirded out. Magnus had a change in his facial expression. Wilbur said, let's settle this your way. The Shandons will compensate with $1 billion. Then have a live press conference broadcasted nationwide, and you'll release Shandon. Magnus laughed and said, haha, I thought the Shandons hired an expert. Is that all you got? Sammy looked nervous, and she wanted to say something, but she endured it after some thought. She felt like she should trust Wilbur since she asked him to help. Rhea glanced at Wilbur in disdain. She said, all right, give us $1 billion first to show your sincerity. Fine. Give me an account number and I'll transfer it right away, said Wilbur with a smile. Rhea was taken aback, so she looked at Magnus. Magnus stared at Wilbur for a long while. Then he asked a waiter for a pen and paper to write an account number. Wilbur glanced at it, and he operated the transfer through his phone to transfer the money. His bank accounts were basically without spending limits, as long as there was money in the bank cards. He had been busy recently, so he earned quite a lot of money. He definitely had over $1 billion to spare. Magnus took his phone out after a moment and saw that he had received $1 billion. He laughed and said, I see. So you found yourself a sugar daddy. All right. I'll release Shandon after the press conference. Deal. I hope this ends as soon as possible, said Wilbur. Let's do it tomorrow afternoon, in appreciation of your willingness. The venue will be this banquet hall. You'll prepare the apology statement, and we'll have the journalists ready. Remember to show up on time. We will, but I hope that you prepare well. It isn't that easy to earn my money, said Wilbur with a faint smile. Then he left with Sammy. Magnus frowned after they left. He asked, Gary, what is the status of that guy? Mr. Ray, I think that man is an aura-level cultivator, replied Gary. Magnus asked, are you sure? So what if he is? Don't worry. I'm invincible as a peak ambience level cultivator, replied Gary confidently. Magnus laughed and said, I don't worry when it comes to you. How dare these nobodies go against me? What a joke. Yeah, that little bitch found herself a sucker. He's willing to spend $1 billion on her. That sucker deserves it. Does that little bitch think she's worth $1 billion? Rhea was condescending, but at the same time, she was also feeling slightly jealous. Magnus chuckled and said, he really is a sucker, but a sucker's money is still money. Why should we say no to that? You'll be trending after tomorrow's press conference, and we'll also use this opportunity to promote your new show. That's killing 3 birds in 1 stone. Isn't it wonderful? Nice plan, Mr. Ray. Let's make that little bitch cry. Rhea gave Magnus a sweet kiss. Chapter 484. Magnus laughed. Wilbur and Sammy walked out of the hotel. Sammy rushed to ask, Sir, how could I have you pay him $1 billion just like that? Don't worry. I told you my money isn't easy to earn, said Wilbur nonchalantly. After they got in the car, Sammy asked in a worried tone, what about tomorrow's apology press conference? What about your money? We will attend the press conference as planned, and I'll speak on your behalf. Don't worry about the money. I'll make them pay back with interest, he replied. Sammy let out a long sigh. She did not know Wilbur's specific plan, but she somehow trusted his capabilities, so she did not probe further. They went back to the hotel room, and she ordered room service for lunch. Wilbur ate without hesitation, while Sammy only had a few bites because she was burdened with worry. It's fine. You don't need to worry since I'm here, Wilbur reassured her. She nodded and picked up the cutlery again. Soon, they were done with lunch. Wilbur made an excuse claiming that he wanted to rest, so he went back to his room. Sammy was alone in the living room. She seemed restless and kept sighing. Wilbur came out with sleepy eyes in the evening to wash up. She served him on the side, and after he finished freshening up, she ordered some refined meals and accompanied him for dinner. After dinner, Wilbur said, "There's nothing here for you to do right now. You can come tomorrow afternoon." "Sir, let me serve you here. You came all this way for me and my brother. So how could I leave now?" asked Sammy. Wilbur sighed and let her be. Sammy suggested that she should accompany him for a stroll outside to admire Zealand's night scenery. He knew she was not in the mood, and she was only trying to spend some time with him, so he rejected her. They watched some shows on TV for a while, then Wilbur made an excuse to retire to his room. He felt uncomfortable to be in a room with a lone woman. Sammy sighed when she saw that he went to rest again, so she went to the shower in the bathroom. The hot water showered on her as she washed her body, and she was gradually blushing harder. She clenched her jaw after some time and wiped herself dry. Then, she sprayed some perfume and came to his room with only a towel wrapped around her body. She hesitated and reached out to open the door slowly. Wilbur seemed to be asleep at the moment. She came to the bedside and looked at Wilbur, who was sleeping soundly. Her mind was racing. She clenched her jaw and removed her towel eventually. She stood there naked, and she lifted his covers slowly. Then, she cautiously slipped under the covers. A feeling that she had never experienced before washed over her. She felt hot all over as if she was steaming. She wanted to take the initiative, but she did not know how to start. She could only curl up under the covers, and she felt jolts as if she was electrified. Wilbur sighed and said, "Why do you have to do that?" She was startled. Then she said in the quietest voice, "Sir, I can't repay you. Please take me. I really am still a virgin."